crashing the party. Anti-establishment candidate Donald Trump becomes the U.S. Republican presidential nominee. What does it mean for the future of America's right wing? Also on today's program, just short of being banned from Rio, the IOC demands all Russian athletes prove they haven't engaged in doping or they can't compete in the Summer Olympics. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Andrea Sankey. They said it would never happen. They said he didn't stand a chance, that he would fade away with time and with the right number of controversial sound bites. And yet last week, America witnessed business mogul turned politician Donald Trump accept the Republican Party's nomination for President of the United States. Over the past year, he sent shockwaves across the nation after winning 37 state primary contests and wiping out 16 other opponents, including party darling Jeb Bush. He's built his campaign on an anti-trade, anti-immigration platform and has deeply polarized the nation with his off-the-cuff remarks on Muslims, African Americans, and even the disabled. Today's Newsmaker is Donald Trump, as we ask how his rise is transforming U.S. Republican politics.
Republicans have chosen their presidential nominee.
It's been the summer of Trump. It's down in the history books. There's never been anything like it.
But while some are celebrating the political shakeup by a billionaire businessman, many Republicans feel it's not a grand time at the grand old party. Trump's coronation was challenged by a Republican campaign dubbed Never Trump to block his candidacy. The absence of traditional heavyweights, Mitt Romney, Ohio Governor John Kasich, and the entire Bush family was notable and unprecedented. Analysts are wondering how an outsider like Trump was able to wedge such a deep divide in the GOP, or whether change was already underway. Many associate the modern Republican Party with values championed by former President Ronald Reagan: low taxes, controlled immigration, and free trade. Values which critics say Trump is single-handedly throwing out.
We will fix his biggest single issue, trade deals that strip our country of its jobs and strip us of our wealth as a country.
But Trump's ascension may be part of a political evolution. The Tea Party movement in 2010 saw the likes of John McCain and Sarah Palin appeal to blue-collar voters. Their popularity chimed with growing frustration among Republicans that President Barack Obama wasn't being challenged enough. Enter the Donald, who famously demanded Obama show proof of his American citizenship. His rise up the Republican ranks no less aggravated his competitors.
Look, I got the Trump action figure!
The Ted Cruz ad portrays Trump as a doll pretending to be a Republican.
Donald Trump.
And pro-Jeb Bush supporters released this, a video depicting Trump as a melting ice sculpture.
Look past the boasting and you'll see right through him.
And warning that Trump losing the general election could crush the Republican Party.
Accused of fraud.
The question now is whether the GOP has united around Trump for the course of the campaign. If Trump loses, will his army of supporters, many of whom aren't even Republican, leave too? And if he wins, could Republicans in Congress oppose Trump's controversial agenda?
The establishment Republicans and the far right will be fighting during this campaign, but also after the campaign. The future is unknown, and the future is going to be very interesting because it's going to be so conflictual.
Whatever his legacy might be as president, Trump has already made his mark on a party that may have changed for good. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Dave Leventhal, senior reporter for the Center for Public Integrity. From Philadelphia, Ash Scow, a writer for the Washington Examiner. And from New Orleans, Matthew Hurt, a Virginia Republican delegate. Dave, let me just start with you. We thought the Republican Party looked divided with the rise of the Tea Party a few years back, but Trump's nomination seems to have taken that beyond the pale. So what is the Republican Party now?
The Republican Party is a party that, make no mistake, is still divided. Now, I was in Cleveland over the past week, and they did a very, very good job to try to bring warring factions together under the banner of Donald Trump. Get on the Trump train was the call all week long. But I think if you heard Ted Cruz's speech, for example, that was sort of the epitome of the rift that still exists between those who are definitely getting behind Donald Trump and want nothing more to see him win and to beat Hillary Clinton, and those who are very skeptical, even looking for alternatives, such as libertarian Gary Johnson, or who might stay home from the polls altogether. This is the big existential question for Donald Trump right now is, can he get enough support even from his own party to have a credible challenge against Hillary Clinton to the point of winning this election, not just coming close?
Okay, Ash Scow, is the Republican Party still one party?
Well, this election is going to make that a real choice for the Republicans. If Trump loses, there's going to be three factions in the Republican Party. There's going to be the faction that believes he could have won if Republicans had just gone behind him. There's going to be the faction that believes he never would have won. And then there's going to be the faction that thinks, you know what, maybe he could have won. He would have been better than Hillary Clinton. If he wins, there's only the two factions, those who think he's ruining the party and those who think he's the future of the party. So it really depends on the general election. Right now, there is still a divided GOP. I mean, there are still people who are saying never Trump means never Trump, not just trying to take him out, but never voting for him. So it's a totally fractured party, but I got to tell you, the DNC right now looking super fractured as well.
Okay, well, Matthew, let me ask you, though, can your candidate, Donald Trump, unite the party? And does he really care?
Well, certainly as a Republican, a small L libertarian, I think that we're bringing together diverse factions. What we've seen over the Republican primary process is Donald Trump bringing in millions of new, what I would call Reagan Democrats, who are blue collar, who live in places like Pennsylvania and Ohio and Michigan, and into rural Virginia and West Virginia and Eastern Kentucky. And I think he can bring new people into the party, an excellent pick for his vice presidential running mate. And I think certainly it's sent shockwaves through the GOP. We'll see where that ends up on November 8th and into the Trump presidency.
Okay, Ash, let me ask you, the party's core members, the Mitt Romneys, the John McCains, former presidents George W. Bush and George H.W. Bush, the list goes on. They will not rally around him during their own convention. What happens now to the party elite, particularly if he wins? Do they become irrelevant?
They absolutely become irrelevant, but I think Mitt Romney is kind of already irrelevant at this point. But we're kind of having an issue here where, as Matt said, Trump is trying to bring in new people from the party, but we're also bleeding a lot of people, a lot of the establishment, and that's really going to matter going forward as this establishment has a lot of the money and the prestige behind them to get in these heavy hitters. And so if they leave, what does the Republican Party look like then? Does it look like the media's portrayal of Trump supporters? Does it go off of Trump's rhetoric that turns a lot of people off and kind of confirms a lot of what Democrats believed about Republicans? I mean, it's kind of a frightening time for the Republican Party right now, as what are they going forward? And, you know, this started with the Tea Party, and then Ted Cruz helped elevate it in 2012, and now Trump has kind of put this whole party evolution on steroids right now. And I think the Republican Party is still kind of reeling from that, as what kind of party are we going to be going forward, and were we prepared for that to happen right now?
Okay, Dave, let me ask you, I want to change track a little bit. Do you think the system itself, the nomination process, the conventions, the Electoral College, is it broken, or at the very least, is it time to reform the entire system?
A heady question and kind of two questions in one. First, you have the primary process, which, if you're looking on the Democratic side, a lot of folks do think it's broken. And in fact, as we go into the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia, they're putting changes in places, at least temporarily or possible for the future to change the way the nominating process will work, dealing with superdelegates, for example, these sort of free agent super voters who can go to nominate any candidate that they want to without the primary or caucus process going through its machinations. Then you have the Electoral College, which is another animal unto itself, the way that the national vote will take place. A lot less likely that that's going to change 4 years from now. You always hear noise about it, but if anything, going forward, both on the Republican and the Democratic side, you may have calls and actual action, if you will, to change the process 4 years from now, different from what it was during this current cycle in 2016.
Okay, Matthew Hurt, the system has worked in favor of your candidate, but still, do you think it's a worthy system?
Absolutely. I think that we have a two-party, first-past-the-post system where the parties are responsible for nominating their respective nominee. And again, it's brought in millions of new voters into the Republican ranks. We've seen registration switch in again, states like Pennsylvania and Ohio, where people are moving from the Democratic Party into the Republican Party and advancing the cause there.
Okay, let me ask this question. Ash, I'm going to start with you again. If Trump loses, as you had predicted he will, what do you think his legacy will actually be?
Oh, that's a difficult one to answer, but I think it's going to be just this coming in, blowing up the Republican Party, and the Republican Party is going to have to pick up the pieces. Is what do they want to be going forward? Do they want to find another Trump? Do they want to find somebody even more outrageous and bombastic than Trump? Or do they go back to a Mitt Romney type? Or maybe next year or next nominating process is someone more like Ted Cruz, who now appears to be between Mitt Romney and Donald Trump, whereas before Ted Cruz used to be the biggest outsider, bombastic, loud voice in the Republican Party. But I think it's going to be a lot of picking up the pieces, whether you were for Trump or against Trump.
Dave, do you think there's any chance he might kind of fade into the background a la Sarah Palin?
Donald Trump fade into the background. That's about as unlikely to happen as an asteroid hitting Washington, D.C. today. Donald Trump is, until Donald Trump does not live on planet Earth anymore, he's going to be somebody who is in the headlines. He will be on TV. He's been somebody who's been incredible in the sense that he's been in the headlines for about 40 straight years, and as a result, don't expect him to go away. Now, the question is he still going to be a part of the Republican Party? Is he going to be a political force? That remains to be seen, but at the same time and by the same token, Donald Trump will still be around very, very much so, regardless of whether he wins the presidency or not.
Okay, Matthew, I want to put that question to you as well. If Trump loses, what do you hope his legacy will be?
What I liked about Ash's response was that it alluded to what our system is. The two major parties are vessels through which the folks who show up get to make decisions. As a small L libertarian Republican, I want to see a party that embraces free trade, that embraces economic opportunity and individual freedom. And so if Trump is ultimately unsuccessful in November, I hope more people like me join the ranks of the Republican Party to advance the issues of liberty.
Okay, Matthew, let me finish with this. Some have said that the U.S. actually needs to do some soul searching and thinking about really revamping the entire system so that more, in your defense here, more independent style candidates can actually participate in the political process. What do you think about moving away, perhaps, from this entrenched two-party system that has not changed for centuries? Go ahead.
I think the American system is very popular with Americans. I think it would be a difficult case to make for a parliamentary system like what we see in the United Kingdom or across Western Europe and other parts of the globe. So I believe that is untenable at this point in American politics.
Okay, Ash, do you think Trump has pointed out any sort of real need for reform, or do you think the system, this two-party system, still serves the American people?
I mean, I think we've seen especially when you have such a large faction of the Republican Party in the Never Trump wing, I think the two-party system, as we say in every election cycle, is broken. There's problems with it, but is there a real chance for a third-party candidate? I mean, Gary Johnson's now kind of getting 10% in the polls. He's a libertarian candidate, but does he have a real chance, or at most, can he just be a spoiler like Ross Perot back in the 90s? And I think it's more of a spoiler candidate still at this point, because whether you vote Never Trump or Donald Trump, I mean, that's just going to split the Republican Party, not really the Democratic Party, so that does kind of help Hillary win. So I think we're still going to be in a two-party system for a long while. Okay, Dave, final words. Is this just the way it's going to be, and Trumps are going to be allowed to just to kind of make their way in there for the foreseeable future?
I agree with Ash completely that the two-party system is here to stay, but we do have two other candidates in the race, Gary Johnson being one of them, and likely Jill Stein on the Green Party ticket. That's going to give both Republicans and Democrats alternatives in this race. And look, Gary Johnson, Jill Stein, are they going to be the president of the United States come November? Almost certainly not, but at the same time, too, in key swing states, whether that's Florida or Ohio or other states around the country where Donald Trump thinks that he can gain ground, even states like Connecticut and New Jersey that he's talking about, if you have 5% of the vote go to one of those third-party candidates, or 4% of the vote go another direction to the liberal candidate, you got some real math here, and both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are going to be thinking very, very long and hard about sort of the other candidates swirling around, because they don't want to bleed those votes to anyone else, and they really have a lot of work to do in regards to that. We're going to see third-party candidates perhaps play a bigger role in this election ever since at least Ralph Nader back in 2000 with Bush v. Gore, and certainly Ross Perot back in the 90s. Okay, interesting take. Dave, I'll let you have the last word. Thanks so much all for joining us. Dave Leventhal, Ash Scow, Matthew Hurt on the Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Still to come on the Newsmakers, Russian athletes come under fire after the IOC demands proof that they will not cheat during the Summer Olympic Games. Well, the Olympic Games are considered the quintessential shining moment for the world's most talented athletes, a chance to perform for the world and represent one's nation with pride, pomp, and circumstance. But for Russian athletes, the run-up to the Summer Games is becoming quite the opposite, throwing them under a spotlight they'd rather not occupy. On Sunday, International Olympic Committee officials said Russia's state-run doping system had tainted its athletes, calling into question their very eligibility to compete. But the IOC stopped short of a full-fledged ban on the country's sports stars, as Christine Perovolakis explains.
We decided that the presumption of innocence cannot be applied to Russian athletes. The international sports federations will carry out an individual analysis of each athlete's anti-doping record, taking into account only reliable international tests. That means Russian tests cannot be taken into consideration.
The International Olympic Committee has decided against a blanket ban on Russian athletes, less than 2 weeks before their games in Rio de Janeiro get underway. But the IOC's decision has set a strict precedent. For individuals to be allowed to compete at Rio, they must have a spotless international record on drug testing. The IOC has also ordered the immediate retesting of all Russian athletes who took part in the Sochi Olympics. This is not the first time Russia has been accused of the systemic use of performance-enhancing substances. The International Association of Athletics Federation has banned Russia's track and field athletes, and hopes that the International Olympic Committee would overturn the ban have faded. The first allegations of doping first surfaced in 2014. According to a German documentary, Russian officials systematically accepted payments to supply banned substances and cover up tests.
The state has never supported violations in sport, and this is particularly the case when it comes to doping. The The state never has and never will support it.
But the allegations were upheld by an independent report from the World Anti-Doping Agency. It found Russia's deep-seated culture of tolerance towards doping has not changed, and a strong and effective anti-doping infrastructure hasn't been created. It also accused the Ministry of Sport of being involved. All things denied by Russia. And with less than 2 weeks before the start of the Rio Games, many people are wondering how the federations will be able to vet Russian athletes in time. Moscow is looking at how its clean athletes can still compete, whether under the Russian flag or as neutrals. But with the absence of Russia's track and field team, many say the Olympics have been tarnished before they've even begun. Christine Pirovolakis, The Newsmakers.
Joining me now from Moscow is Russian sports commentator Oleg Dmitriev. Thanks so much for joining us. First, let me ask you what you think of the IOC's latest ruling. Is it fair, or does it set a bad example?
Well, hello, it's nice to be here with you. So here in Russia, the decision of the International Olympic Committee is mostly treated as fair because the IOC really abided by the Olympic Charter. An Olympic Charter says that all the sportsmen from all the countries have a right to compete in the Olympic Games. So that's the positive thing. The other thing, there is a little bit of a frustration or misunderstanding in the Russian society, in the Russian sports community, because right now the International Olympic Committee has banned all the sportsmen that has been caught on doping even once, no matter whether they have served their sentence, their punishment or not. That means that athletes from other countries besides Russia will be able to participate in the Olympics, even if they serve their doping sentences, their doping suspensions. So this is not viewed as fair treatment of Russian clean athletes that are clean at the moment.
Okay. But there's not much to be done about it then 2 weeks before the Olympics begin. First, let me ask you this, though. WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, has said it's disappointed in the IOC's latest ruling, that they think, given the evidence, there should be a full blanket ban. Why do you think WADA and the IOC are at odds here?
Well, actually, the WADA has done what it has been doing for a certain period of time, just banning Russian athletes. But WADA tries to substantiate its actions according to the reports by Mr. McLaren at its commission. But the real fact of the doping that the tests were meddled with was not provided. And the World Anti-Doping Agency also tries to present one side of the coin. It does not cooperate with the Russian authorities. So that's why we can't, and there are some authorities in Russia, even in the federations and the Track and Field Association and in other agencies that are willing to cooperate and provide information. But for some reason, WADA discards this information as inappropriate.
Okay.
And just Russia was picked as just an example of bad guys for the world community, which is not exactly true.
Okay, Oleg, let me ask you, though. Putin, your president, feels this is all a conspiracy to discredit his country, and many Russians believe him. What do you think? And if it is a conspiracy, I mean, to what end?
Actually, this is a mixture of politics and sports. And, well, it's hard for me right now to define the terms, whether it's a conspiracy or not. But what we are dealing with is the massive attack of the press. For example, 4 hours before the verdict of the IOC, British tabloids such as Daily Mail said that everything has already been decided and Russians are not going to Rio. So right after the IOC ruling, we see that the huge media attack is focused on Thomas Bach. And you have to consider that he was the former, he is Olympic champion. There are no former Olympic champions. So many people view it as a media attack against Russia where the picture was not portrayed objectively.
Okay.
Because there are violations, doping violations by other federations. So that's the key point.
Oleg, final question for you. Do you think the competing Russian athletes that are proven clean will still feel a permanent stain of what happened, where even if they win, people will wonder?
Well, actually, today I was talking to one of the athletes from synchronized swimming team, and I was asking my fellow journalists, so what is the situation there? And I was asking them questions, so how they are doing. They seem to be positive, optimistic, but they are athletes. You know, they really can endure all the hardships of the sports, but they are positive, and if they are allowed to do it, they will do it. They will show their best, I'm sure of it.
I'd like to thank you so much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Today's Newsmaker was Donald Trump, as we asked how his rise is transforming American Republican politics. Last week, the United States witnessed the reality TV star turned politician accept the Republican Party's nomination for President of the United States. Over the past year, he sent shockwaves across the nation after winning 37 state primary contests and wiping out 16 opponents. Some say the strongman populist is a kind of Republican Party Frankenstein created by the right's policies and subliminal rhetoric over the past decade, and that the conditions were ripe for someone like Trump to waltz in and clinch the nomination. Others say he's greatly departed from traditional establishment politics and changed the party forever. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Andrea Sankey. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.